You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Shannon, the mic's yours, and just ease into it. Here we go.
All right. I'm Shannon Robinson, and I'm going to be reading a story from my collection, The Ill-Fitting Skin, and it's a story called Dirt. The house and all its dirt waited for my touch. I was parked by the curb with the engine running. I wanted to go in because I wanted to get on with it. I also wanted to drive away, go fast and far until I ran out of gas, until I dropped off the edge of the earth. But the earth is round, so round and round we go. And there I was, back again, in my disintegrating Chevy Malibu, with my rubber gloves, bucket, and dollar store cleaning products all riding shotgun. I switched off the engine and pushed my head against the steering wheel, pressure just shy of sounding a horn. It was time to face the filth. I went to college, and somehow, never mind my talent for detours, I imagined that I'd have a house of my own by now, that I'd be paying off a mortgage, planting a garden, maybe remodeling a kitchen. That is to say, I didn't expect to end up cleaning other people's houses. While my resume is circulated like so much debris in an asteroid field, I couldn't have John paying the rent all by himself, having him doling out cash to me, an allowance from his slim salary as an adjunct. I wanted to be a kept woman only in the sense of not being dumped. John didn't laugh at that one. No keep earned there. You're too hard on yourself, he said. You have to say that, I said. There's no penance to be done. You made the choice you needed to make. No call for martyrdom. He was smiling, but there was a tightness to it. Well, good. Truth be told, I had the kind of cleverness that readily alchemizes into stupidity by way of vanity. 5 years in a PhD program, and nothing to show for it except a box of rambling notes. So this is indeed my penance for being so ineffectual, I tell myself as I scrubbed, wiped, scoured. The idea was that it was a temporary gig, a stopgap, and soon a real job would surface, like a magical island or a dead body. Hartley Spencer said he'd found me through my Craigslist ad, which I'd more or less forgotten about. Most people seem to hear about me through word of mouth, as my name passed through a network of busy people with enough money to outsource the boring, time-burning business of keeping house. My email exchange with Hartley was terse on his side, little more than a name, an address, a time. I'm one of those people still stuck on the idea that email should resemble the correspondence of yesteryear, with salutations, full sentences, grammar, etc. I need to just get over it and stop crafting epistles. The picture I'd formed in my mind of this Hartley, young, maybe a snappy junior executive in a silk tie, began flickering as soon as I saw the house, with its unkempt lawn and peeling paint. I wondered if the neighbors ever complained. The buzzer didn't work, so I knocked again, and finally the door was answered by a short, pale, potato-shaped guy of indeterminate age. He was balding on top, and his frizzy clown wig hair stood out from the sides of his head. Amid the constellation of acne on his chin, an unpopped whitehead shone like Venus. "Hi," I said. "Hartley Spencer?" He hesitated, as if he were about to be accused. "Yes," he decided. "It's Sharon. We have an appointment today?" "Oh," he said. "Oh." His eyes looked past me to the street and then zigzagged over me, down and up. "Should I pay you now?" "Sure." And then, as I took the bills that he extended to me, stiff-armed, I added, "Thank you." I never knew if that was the appropriate thing to say. "I'm going to start in the kitchen," I said. The house smelled of BO, must, and microwave nachos. It looked like it had been furnished with cast-off hotel furniture, that weird blend of indestructible and cheap-looking, all dull gloss, pleather, and acrylic tweed. "Okay," he said, "it's through here." He sat down at the kitchen table, presumably to watch me work, so I started with the dirty dishes piled in the sink. Whatever, dude. A little while back, I'd cleaned for an old lady who followed me around the house. She would sit with her tea and a book, affecting the premise that she just happened to be there in the background. Whenever I moved on to a new room, she'd come drifting along, teacup rattling, and settle herself within a sight line. "You missed a spot." She actually said that, and at first I thought she might be kidding. Not the case. She was supervising from behind the fourth wall. After a few weeks, she turned me out for using the bathroom. "I will have no locked doors in this house," she said. I wondered who she was really talking to. But this guy, he was silent. Near silent. Between intermittent blasts from the faucet, I could hear him breathing. I moved on to the counters. "I thought you'd be dressed differently," he said. "Different how?" I was wearing yoga pants and a hoodie, with the sleeves pushed up, perfectly presentable. He kept quiet as I sprayed a cabinet and then scrubbed the goo around the knob. "Like wearing a uniform?" I said. "Maybe." "Yes, I think that could be nice. I'm just a freelancer." Freelancer. God, my diction, the vestigial tale of my pretension. I'm not with the company. And just then, it all became very clear, and I stopped scrubbing. As I've already admitted, I'm not as sharp as I used to think I was. I heard myself ask, "So, what kind of uniform? A French maid?" Blushing did not become him. He looked like he'd been scalded. "I think there's been some misunderstanding," I said. "In the film of my life, during this scene, there will be a subtitle underneath my dialogue providing translation. Fuck off, perv." You'd think I would have hightailed it out of there. I did, but not before scheduling another session. Historically, I am terrible at recognizing and making exits. Let me be completely upfront about that. Lousy romances, lousy friendships, my shaggy dog, grad school experience. Oh, I stick it out, try to make it work. Blame it on my church-going mother, who wouldn't leave her shitty marriage. Blame it on my private girls' school education with its constant subtext of, just who do you think you are? Blame it on Rio, blame it on the rain. Hartley made me do all the haggling. I started at 4 times my fee, and then lowered it in $5 increments until he finally unglued his gaze from the tabletop. I drove home and reviewed the whole episode in my mind, doing my best not to talk to myself while at stoplights. "I thought you'd be dressed differently." Why had he expected anything? Why hadn't I thought to ask why? At least he hadn't said, "I thought you'd be prettier," although maybe he'd been thinking that. Hell, it's what I think whenever I catch a glimpse of myself. The way he'd scanned me on the doorstep, without even trying to be subtle. He was someone, I thought, who didn't have much of a relationship with his mirror, judging from his goofy hair and his unharvested zits. Granted, the lighting in that house was truly awful. My eyes hurt from all the squinting. It wasn't exactly a French maid's uniform, but it was the best I could manage, both in terms of what I had in my closet and what I was willing to wear for Hartley. White t-shirt, black pencil skirt, black flats. I looked like catering staff. It would have to do. Had I told John about any of this? I wanted to, but every time I tried, I didn't. Didn't actually try, that is. Hartley preferred that I just clean the kitchen, and that was fine because the place seemed to have reverted to extreme filthiness within a week. Like I'd passed through a wormhole to a month's worth of splatter, crust, and neglect. Could he really be such a slob? Maybe it was part of his whole fetishistic deal. The cleaning session was a replay of the last time. I cleaned while he watched from his position at the table. Lather, rinse, repeat. Although this time I spot scrubbed the sticky kitchen floor, and I gathered he especially liked this activity because I could hear his chair squeaking as he tried to be subtle about adjusting its angle. And I could hear his breathing change. I thought I heard him take a shot from an inhaler, but it's possible I was imagining that. As before, he paid me up front. This time, he offered an envelope that had been sealed with so much Scotch tape you'd have thought the contents included something alive and capable of escape. How canny of him to judge that I wouldn't want to mangle it open in front of him. I did that later, as I sat in my Rustmobile parked around the corner. Inside the envelope, along with the cash, was a picture torn from what appeared to be a costume store catalog. He'd circled a picture of a girl in a French-maid outfit, and on the picture, he'd double-circled the high heels. A uniform. Fine. I'd worn stupider clothes, by choice and in public, back when I thought I was hot stuff. The next week, I turned up in the outfit, which I'd hidden beneath a jacket. The lace edging on the sleeves was so cheap it scratched my skin, and the asbestos-like fabric of the skirt had already put a run on my nylons. Yeah, nylons, courtesy of the 1990s. The shoes were just as dated, shiny black cockroach killers from the Goodwill, with battle scars on the 4-inch heels. I handed Hartley the receipts. "You never finished cleaning that first time," he said. By the time I'd processed this non sequitur, I found that I was already cleaning, the moment of possible protest gone. The kitchen table was sporting a tablecloth, and I thought maybe Hartley was trying to class the joint up. But the tablecloth was, like my dress, a sleazy facsimile. The real purpose of the vinyl draping became obvious soon enough. Obvious is the wrong word. Evident. Maybe there's some change in barometric pressure when a dick gets pulled out of a pair of pants. I sensed something. And then, yes, it got obvious. And I pretended not to hear the little grunts. Boy, did I make those cabinets sparkle. Every time an image appeared in my brain, I just kept clicking the little X in the corner of the box. His slitty eyes, click. His busy hand, click. His purple cock, click. And I'll stop there.
Shannon Robinson. I've read your new book, and I found that within that particular story of Dirt, there's this incredible vulnerability, like where, as the reader, I think you could feel yourself in that situation. And I found that as you gave details of what was going on, I felt so enraptured by needing those details to understand, like threat, safety, the relationship that's going on there, and enthralled during that reading, but the story as a whole.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, tell us. I mean, it's always fun to have a collection. Now, the collection, The Ill-Fitting Skin, which I wanted to tell you, I was pleased. With reading, sometimes you get into habits or different forms of writing you become more attracted to over times. And I've read for long enough where I've had like phases in different parts where I read shorter writing, shorter fiction. Recently, I had a guest, Morgan Parker, with essays. I hadn't read essays, just an essay collection for a while. And then with just shorter works collected here in The Ill-Fitting Skin, I got to tell you, it was really, it was so well done and so varied with each of the stories that I was like, oh, that's what it's like to read kind of great short works. So it really thrilled me because it'd been an amount of time in doing that. Tell us about The Ill-Fitting Skin. Having this collection of your works out now and like the book going into the world. What's it mean? What's it like for you right now?
It's really exciting. I mean, I've been writing these stories over the course of a little over 10 years, and now to actually have them all bound together in a book. I mean, there's something enchanting too about a physical copy of a book to hold in hand, which is thrilling. I mean, sometimes the stories would be published online, but other times they would be in print, so they're not all accessible. So it's just lovely to be able to point people to, the collection of my work, what I've been thinking about on and off over the course of a decade. And of course, with a short story collection, you're always looking for like what do these stories have in common? What is the thing that binds them together, as opposed to it just being kind of a weird potpourri? And I think the themes are, they're definitely motherhood is there, but trying to nurture other people and trying to nurture yourself, I think is there as well. And the figure in the story that I read from, I mean, she's struggling to have a good relationship with herself, to be kind to herself. And instead there's a line where she feels like metabolizing the shame is part of the job.
I was wondering too in the with the varied content. I was listening very closely as far what you were saying thematically. And there's a quality within the stories that I adored, a discomfort, right? In the situations that somebody's encounter. And part of the discomfort, like you said, has to do with, at least in this story, but like grappling with yourself. What should I be doing? Shame, like, is it worth it? And who's tricking who? I wanted to mention one other story just to give you like like I try to give raw impressions. I mean, like, I studied literature, when I went to the university, and literature is my first love. And I do I work in labor, in the labor movement, and there's always such a quite thrill in dropping back into, like I said, reading and stories. One of the things with your work, All Things Bright and Beautiful, um, I gotta tell you, like, in reading it, the one quality I found, and I apologize because I'm always like very careful with how to describe things, literary, that I'm trying to like the feel of it. But I felt this in almost in a classic and beautiful way, this like Salinger element to the family, the pieces of the family, the glass family that you find there, and just this power of these individuals and these characters that you do a job where you pull folks into that dynamic. If you're not pulled into that dynamic, the story doesn't work. It's, but to pull people in and say, who's around? What are we trying? We're trying to help somebody, like you said, with nurture. And it had this beautiful power of capturing the difficulty and the pain. And sometimes it feels just unflinching. And as a writer, like when you do that, I love when it works like that. Did you? Like I said, using Salinger and saying that type of thing, but I was trying to convey the pieces that were in there and that you find in that piece. What do you think about maybe my reaction
Oh,
towards?
well, it's really,
Sorry.
really flattering to be compared to Salinger in any way. What a master um, prose stylist. But yeah, I could see what you're talking about. The family in All Things Bright and Beautiful. I mean, they are sensitive and they're intelligent, and yet in some ways, that intellectual energy gets in the way. Like they're trying to intellectualize a problem that is really about sort of deep seated feelings that can defy their ability to kind of like, this is not going to go away because they write eloquent letters, because they're witty. Like this is
Yeah,
just
yeah.
this is deep pain, and try as they may, they can't quite rescue this brother, which is heartbreaking. I mean, and at the end of that story, I mean, this is a spoiler, but she thinks that perhaps they had some success with this intervention, and she never hears from him again. And I'm not explicit about that, but that's because, I mean, it could be he disappears from her life, but it's because he kills himself.
Oh, and folks, for enjoy it when you do read it, you stuck the landing on that ending, even in the ambiguity. And there's something where, it's a philosophy and art podcast, right? So there's an aspect where, like, that type of ambiguity and difficulty there's a beauty in that. The resolution isn't quite there. All right. So Shannon, obviously talking about your work, but philosophy program here. So I wanted to drop down and like, and just digging in about your thoughts, about your work. I mean, you dedicate yourself to the writing process, and new published edition here. What about yourself as an artist, as a writer? Was there a moment, like, was it a moment that you're like, I'm a writer, I'm an artist? As far as you seeing yourself as you're an identity, did that happen, or what was it
It
like?
took a long time,
Long
actually.
time.
It took a
Yeah.
long time. I didn't start writing stories until I was in my 30s. Um, I had always, I mean, sometimes a lot of writers, they say, oh, I was always, writing stories, even as a little kid. Not me. Um, but I used to tell people I didn't write at all. I did write things. I mean, I wrote journal entries. I kept journals since the age of 10. I wrote, funny articles for the student paper. I wrote long letters to people in the days before email. So I was a letter writer. There were lots of things I was writing, but they weren't stories. And then when I got married and moved to the States, and I couldn't legally work here because I'm a Canadian. I'm an American now, but I was a Canadian. So I was at loose ends and I took a creative writing course and I started writing. I thought, oh yeah, I mean, I'd always loved books, but I didn't think I was capable of telling stories. But then it turns out I was, and this is what I'd always wanted to do. But I mean, for some reason, I think a lot of people are kind of leery about identifying as a writer. For some reason, we feel like being a writer is a constant process of arriving. And I think if you're doing it right, you are always taking on projects that you feel you can't pull off. You don't know, how am I going to do this? You're constantly teaching yourself new things. You're constantly pushing towards things that seem to defy expression. I mean, you'd mentioned ambiguity earlier, and I think, this is sort of classic writerly advice, but always begin with that ambiguity and ambivalence. Like, what do you feel ambivalent about? That's where you have to dive in, because that will produce the most interesting writer. Something that you don't know, something that's been bothering you, and you just don't know quite how you feel about it. Some memory or image you have that is causing some kind of turbulence in your soul. That is going to make for a good story.
Yeah. Wow. That helps crystallize it. And I really appreciate your thoughts, and in thinking about the identity, and as a writer, I noticed your comment there about identifying as a writer, and for me, it's a bit of an uh I don't want to say outsider perspective, but it feels like a little bit. Sometimes I think about painting in writing in the same way, as far as my appreciation of it, where like when you enjoy particular forms of art, there's something like you're really attaching to, like how do you pull that off? And for me, I think it's like within painting with color, it's like, how is it? How really is it that you can convey so much, with this paint, and shows so much? And I think about writing in such a there's an ego, there's a stubbornness to trying it that I really think is really cool. That you're like, and there's an odd piece about it. Like, why do you choose um to do that? And I think about it with words of like, how do you convey ambiguity, mixed motivation, maybe unreliable narrator, and make a coherence out of what's going on, or don't make a coherence.
Mm. And
As a philosopher, I think, yeah.
I mean, it's not as if I don't have any notions. A writer shouldn't have certain notions or beliefs. I mean, John Gardner wrote a book years back called On Moral Fiction. And it's not about crafting didactic fiction, right, that teaches a lesson. It's more about, he thought writing should be about exploring serious questions. How do we behave? What is good for us? What does it mean to love people? All of that. That there should be some kind of touchstone within your work that bespeaks values of what you think is important.
Yeah, I appreciate you mentioning Gardner too. I think about sometimes I think about writers who have written about or writing or how to write, and Gardner's was certainly one of them, and a beautiful craft. But Stephen King, talking about writing and how is it that you write. All right, wanted to keep it with like the aspect of art. What is art? What is art, Shannon?
What is art?
Yeah.
Gosh, that is a big question. I suppose, I mean, what did Oscar Wilde say? All art is quite useless, which perhaps was a reaction against Victorian feelings that, art should teach a lesson. Or art, a book is either well done or not. That is it. But I guess art is some kind of expression of our experience of reality. Maybe that's what art is. I mean, it's also there to entertain, right?
Yeah.
We engage with art because we want to feel. I mean, at the beginning of the podcast, I said, "Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it," but I think you can enjoy my stories, but there's also a sense of being unsettled, hopefully, by
Yes.
stories. So yeah, it's more about engagement. Like we want to be interested in some way. We want to just not have what we already believe confirmed. Um, we want both recognition and we want to be sort of rattled a little bit, and we want art maybe to ask us some questions as well.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things I was wondering, and I, for me, it's part of the privilege of to have a conversation with the writer and kind of pick into like the creative piece of it was, in your writing, I'm always really fascinated by writing with an edge or exposing or being strange in trying to handle all these complicated feelings. And one of the things in the bravery of it, as a writer, it's a creative thing that you've made, but it always feels like there's pieces of you in what you present. Uh, as far as writing these stories over time, and like you said, you had started deliberately doing it in your 30s. Did you find like your approach or like uh, getting through life and writing as being mm, therapeutic, like a process? Did it change how you lived when you were able to write this way and publish?
Yeah, I guess it did, in that um, you're always looking to, people want to be heard, right? You want people to recognize in you the things that you find compelling. And so to be able to connect with other people in that way is very gratifying. I mean, part of it is also sort of on a cheap level. Yes, I love the attention. That's so much fun. but but it's attention for something that I hold dear. It feels like the best of myself is going into these stories. This is me at my most thoughtful, and so to be able to present that in a work of art, I think is uh, very gratifying
Yeah.
and a useful way to connect to people as well.
Yeah. I got to tell you, the book's cool too. I don't know if that's always like the thing. I mean, it's got Dungeons and Dragons in it. That shit was so cool. You had the like a choose your own adventure kind of like trick within one of the stories, like right up my alley. Like my head exploded when I saw that. I'm like, I understand those type of paths and that way of moving through a story. But just that little touch was just really cool. I thought back, I'll still pick up those type of books, but I thought back when I was be like 11 or 12, and who knows, you're a kid bumping around trying to figure out things. You get one of those paperback books, and you're all of a sudden in the middle of a dungeon, wherever the heck you are, when you're an imaginative kid, and I'm like, man, I'm glad they had those choose your own adventures and battle books because I was in that dungeon.
Weren't they magic? God, I love those
They were the
books.
best.
I
It's
love
so
those
cool.
books. And it's also the sense of like, oh, I am co-creating this story. And I don't think the people who wrote those books thought in terms of, reader engagement in any kind of high level theoretical way.
Yeah.
But yeah, you are, in some ways you feel like you're the co-author, but also there would be those times, right? You'd be reading and you're like, I am doing everything right. And I keep dying. Like I keep, falling down the
There's a loop.
stairs.
There's
And
a
being
loop here.
right.
The
See,
path out.
and I thought, isn't this a great metaphor for being in a really crappy relationship with somebody? Like you feel like you're just sort of caught in these defeating patterns. And yeah, so I wanted to graft that on to a choose your own adventure. And I also wanted to pull in all the classic kind of choose your own adventure cheese ball settings of spaceship, yeah, haunted castle.
I love that. I love that. And the piece was too is like I can remember, being a little bit obsessive and in those books, when I was younger, because it was such a fascinating place to go though in those adventures. And I remember one that I had, and I swear that like it was not solvable, and that's what was so funny. I think in enjoying it, like I went through this book. It's like a thick one. Like I even trying to like read through it. I'm like, there's a missing. It's like there's a missing multiverse here or a link in
They're
this damn
messing
book.
with us.
So, did anybody ever finish this book from 1985 and complete it
Yeah.
successfully? So.
Yeah, that's our Jumanji, right?
Oh, that's really good. No, thank you. No, I did enjoy that. What about the book? It's out from Press 53. As far as you having the opportunity to do a little bit of reading here or there, and like what's going on with the book like right
With
now?
the book, I have my publicist, Lori Hetler, has been really great about
Hey,
sort of getting
Lori.
me.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Lori.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's been great about getting me into venues where I do interviews. So I've done some of that, and I've also been doing readings, which have been I love doing readings. I do them online, but live I think is my favorite because just feeding off that that energy is really fun. So and I'll just keep setting those up. I'll go wherever invited, and I'll just anytime. I mean, you know how it goes. You figure out where
Yeah.
you know people, and then you partner with a local author and read in their venue, and then at some point you return the favor. So, I mean, I think that's the ecosystem of writers.
Yeah, yeah. Congrats on that.
Thank
It's
you.
great to hear those opportunities and folks definitely look up the ill-fitting skin. Highly recommended short story collection and spanning a range of Shannon's recognized writings. And Shannon, you're out there in Baltimore, which is a very distinct, a city I personally really enjoy. I grew up on the East Coast in Rhode Island. There's a grittiness, industrial grittiness to Baltimore I understand and can inhabit rather easily. But one of the things that's really cool in doing the show is sometimes being able to connect with different artists in an area. And I found it so thrilling to discover, I'd say in Baltimore and in Philly, just being able to kind of run into authors and maybe the scene there and painters and musicians and kind of get a feel of the city and just a vibrant place. I find, I mean, it everybody has their opinions, I think, about Baltimore and because it has this edge to it that I understand, but creatively, I find to be quite the area. Do you find the experience to be like that as far as creative and thinking within Baltimore?
Yeah, I mean, Baltimore's got a lot of heart, and I
Yeah.
feel like people are just they are very grateful and up for it whenever there's something happening on the art scene. And there are great independent bookstores. So, two specifically that I have connections to are the Ivy Bookshop, which has a branch near Johns Hopkins campus called Bird in Hand, and also Greedy Reads. And they have two locations. My book launch will actually be at the Remington location for Greedy Reads.
Heck
Both,
yeah.
yeah, both incredible independent bookstores. Um, Red Emma's is also a cafe. They have a reading series. So like there's cool stuff going on. And yeah, I mean, I really enjoy Baltimore. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good atmospheres. I like to get a little bit of the feel of it, and haven't been around that area, and it is fun on the show to be able to drop into and just learn a little bit about how it feels producing in an area. I have the big old fancy question that's the show's title that it's worth taking a crack at, or at least I
Yes.
tell guests that it is.
I'm like rolling up my
Shannon
sleeves.
Shannon Ryder and over there from Baltimore. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Why is there something rather than nothing? Because we are compelled to make meaning. We're compelled to create meaning, and we're also compelled to find meaning. So we will compulsively interpret what are all our surroundings, I think. Um, that's why.
I feel your answer.
Yeah. Right.
I feel sometimes. Yeah, I feel. I feel your answer. No, it's. I'd love to talk. I'd love to talk literature, and just writers talking about, and writers and readers talking about things they enjoy. You had mentioned John Gardner. I was just was interested in getting a feel for your work and your writing, which I love. Kind of those writers that really made an impact on you, say as a writer, as a reader, that you're like, holy shit, like this is writing, like this is rocking my world. For you, who's that been over time?
Over time,
Yeah.
my earliest literary influence is
You know,
Beatrix
whatever,
Potter.
whatever the
Yeah.
ones you like. I'm on Talk Books. This
Yeah.
is who I'm going to talk about.
All right. Cool. Yeah. Beatrix Potter, when I was a kid,
Yeah.
who I thought she has anthropomorphized animals, and yet they're not twee, they're not sweet, they're predators and prey, and so that made a huge impression on me as a kid,
Wow.
huge
Yeah.
impression on me. And later, I mean, Margaret Atwood was the first author whose work I read in entirety.
Oh gosh.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I was laid up with mono as a teenager, and
Wonderful. That's great.
yeah. And I was given a shopping bag full of all her books, and I read it, and I just thought, oh, this is incredible. And Alice Munro as well. So two Canadian women who is an amazing writer. She described people as uh, deep caves paved with linoleum. It's wonderful, right? Like she writes, she's not like she's writing about things that
It
are,
makes an instant weird sense somehow. I don't know how, but
she's writing about the everyday, and yet I am
yeah.
never bored. I am constantly fascinated and feeling like I'm always discovering things about human nature with her. So yeah, she's been an influence. Kelly Link, I think, is wonderful, and Karen Russell and George Saunders and Carmen Maria Machado, and we'll enjoy all their work, all that sort of constellation of the weird. Um, Toni Morrison is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really. This is the point where I get nervous. Is like, oh, I'm going to leave out like 20 people who are all incredible writers. But yeah, those are the people who are popping to
And
mind.
Toni Morrison, I think sometimes in reading Toni Morrison, you think about, like, as a theorist, like how profound her analysis is, but also as a creator too. You don't always see that, where somebody breaking down writing and color and race and what's hidden and what's shown. Like, her intellectual work on that is just incredible. And
She
her
has a
writing.
short, yes, she has a short story, Recitative, which is incredible. You can find it online. And Zadie Smith has written an analytic essay of it. So I recommend those two things. There's something that I
Oh yeah.
taught recently, and the students were just fascinated by it. So that's my shout out recommendation.
Yeah. Yeah. I got just one thing I wanted to mention on the books too. I had this very interesting experience just recently of listening to The Shining by Stephen King. And I
Mhm.
had read this book by Stephen King. I adored the film, and I was liked the book, but was critical of it in my head. But I had read it,
Yeah.
shit, 30 years ago, right?
Wow.
So it's this type of thing as you go on in years, where you read it at a time and you have an opinion in your head that's stuck in there about it. And I
Yeah.
was listening to the Shining again, and I gotta tell you, it was the coolest thing, because like I remembered it all wrong somehow, or there was a pace and a cadence that was so radically different than the film that I'm like, it's even tough to talk about these works of art together, because and listen to Shining, I was like halfway through it, I'm like, he's still working on the background psychology and history and the messiness of going into this hotel. Whereas in the movie, you kind of thrown right into it pretty darn quickly without the psychological bit. So in reading this book, listening to this book again after so much time, it's like a completely different experience, and just blown me away as far as the thinking that's been within it. And I love when books do that.
So interesting. I mean, King doesn't really like. I mean, famously didn't like the film
Right.
adaptation.
I
But
know
I mean,
why now.
I was really moved reading his writing memoir on it's called On Writing, right?
Yeah.
And when he talks about how he didn't even know it, but he was creating metaphors about his addiction in so much of his writing.
Oh my
He wasn't
gosh.
even really talking about that. And yet there it was over and over and over again. And I think he's very humble as a writer. He's very vulnerable in that book. So I do
Yeah.
recommend that book for the nonfiction segment of it. The craft stuff is very nuts and bolts and really good, sensible advice. But his memoir section I thought was, very moving.
I completely agree, and I think there was an experience of it where, through life, and when it's one thing with a book, when you drop into again, when I dropped into again, like there was a piece where I felt there was this like alcoholic screed, like at its like somewhere at its core of being like, this is madness, this is the madness, and like you said about the personal piece within that, it was like, whoa, the power of that. And it's horror. Of course, it's horror. And it's
Mm.
seeing things in the future. And it's repetition of history. And it's murder. And it's mayhem. And it's all of that.
Yeah, so those are his demons. Boy,
Oh,
did
my
they
goodness.
dance.
Oh, goodness. No, I get excited about books. I was listening to The Shining and also going into your riveting, The Ill-Fitting Skin. So I just wanted to say, really congratulations on having this pulled together and just telling you listeners and talking to Shannon Robinson here, just a really a collection for me that just got me excited about reading, and in particular this the shorter form, and the excitement that you get in a collection being like, okay, like I dropped into that one, this one's different, and moving through that whole experience. I wish you really good luck with getting the book out there. And I did have just one more question before I let you go. And high regards for the institution and working with Johns Hopkins and teaching and such, and the working on the craft for you in the big question of like teaching or helping folks how to write. Is there something you run into something that is just, maybe is where people don't see themselves as writers, or something that's just in the way that you see to kind of like, I don't know, not like this like hack or anything, but just you as an instructor of if somebody wants to write, how do they get at that gosh darn thing?
I'd say someone asked me about this recently, and I think what can stand in your way, particularly, you're this undergraduate, you've been a high achiever, you've done everything right in high school. Here you are, uh, they can be inhibited. I guess they're used to writing a 3 paragraph essay. You're used to being, uh, there's sort of an emphasis on tidiness and order. And then here you are, you're writing a story, and on the story, be crazy, be vulnerable, be wild, don't be inhibited. I think people can be very inhibited. They don't want to expose themselves because they know their peers are going to be reading this, and, their professor is going to be reading this. But take risks. I mean, uh, and don't worry about this draft maybe being, melting trouble on a stick. That is okay. It's a story. It's a draft. We'll work with it. We'll work with it. Don't be so cautious, I would say. And I think that can hold people back. So that's my main advice. It's just, yes, be
That
reckless. Go for it.
that helps a lot. I'm glad I asked the question. It's kind of clumsily like moving through it a little bit, but there's that's a big thing, and I find that, like, for me, hearing it from you is the big thing of, the vulnerability of showing or even presenting or creating, a record of, like, weird feelings and things like that. There's that jump in writing is, super exciting, but an incredible vulnerability, which I think your work, really gets into. Finally, tell folks, where to maybe find you, the book, about the press, coming in contact with, maybe physically in the area, just make sure folks know and hear about and encounter your work.
Yeah, my book is with Press 53. So if you just Google them on Press, you can buy the book from them, but it's also available wherever books are sold. And if your independent bookstore doesn't have it, you can ask them to stock it, because you always want to support your independent bookstores. You can find me online at shannonrobinson.org. By some miracle, that was available as a website.
Hey,
So shannonrobinson.org.
congratulations.
Thank you. So that's me. And I have listings there of, whatever press I've done, and some stories, and also some whatever events are coming up. So that's it.
Well, wonderful. And hey, everybody, for Something Rather Than Nothing, www.somethingratherthannothing.com was available too, Shannon.
How good is that?
Thanks the world for that. There is it's good to it's good to have a website in a place to find the work that you do. I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the show. I really love talking about writing and talking to writers, and especially when I really enjoy, I get a thrill and I get moved, by writing. So again, congrats on doing the work that you do, and the collection. Folks, check out the Ill-Fitting Skin. It's a nice looking volume, everybody, just so you know. Just a nice design, well put together. One of those books you enjoy to hold. So Shannon, thanks for coming on the Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Heck yeah, it's a lot of fun talking about art, philosophy, and thanks for your writing. Truly impressive.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.
And listeners, to stay connected with us and our guests, visit somethingratherthannothing.com. Join our mailing list for exclusive updates and access to guest-created art. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast platform. People really read that shit. Your support helps us reach more listeners and spread our community across the planet. This is a global show, and we like to give a shout out to our many listeners across the world, including many listeners in Canada, Spain, Germany, UK, Argentina, Brazil, India, Thailand, and so many more places. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast for behind the scenes content. And the best way to help the show is to tell your friends about us. If you love it, they'll love it too. Tell your friends who love it. We love you. This is Something Rather Than Nothing podcast.